We are absolutely delighted to have Lauren Steinberg with us this evening, who is a climate policy analyst at the Department of Environmental Conservation's Office of Climate Change, and she leads the Office of Climate Change's Adaptation section. Originally from Long Island, Lauren moved to the Capital Region in 2021 to work in the Office of Climate Change. Before that, she worked as an environmental analyst for the town of East Hampton and led the town's work on energy sustainability and renewable energy. Lauren has a BS in psychology and an MS in environmental sustainability. She's traveled all the way from Saratoga County to be with us this evening. And begin with Lauren. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Thank you very much for having me. We're always delighted to come in and speak in person about the work the state is doing to address climate change and how we're helping and supporting communities to do this really important work. Like Bob said, I'm with the DEC Office of Climate Change. I lead the Adaptation section in the Office of Climate Change, or OCC, as we abbreviate ourselves. And oops, I already there we go.
That's all.
Okay.
Did it work regularly?
Perfect. Okay. A light touch with the mouse here. Whenever I am presenting on behalf of OCC, I'm not sure how many people are really familiar with the Office of Climate Change in DEC. We're kind of under the executive division and aren't maybe as recognizable as some of the other divisions in the agency, like Division of Water or Division of Lands and Forests. But the Office of Climate Change has been around since 2007. And it was created to lead the development of policies, programs, and initiatives that take on the challenges of climate change by helping New York communities, state agencies, and other organizations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that we know are causing climate change, and also to adapt to the unavoidable impacts of climate change that we're currently seeing and that we have the data to know are anticipated into the future. And the work that we do in the Office of Climate Change falls into several focus areas. Our Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Bureau focuses on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide and methane and other climate pollutants from anthropogenic or human-made sources. The work of my section, the Adaptation section, which is in our Adaptation and Community Partnership Bureau, focuses on advancing state and local adaptation and resilience to climate change hazards and impacts. We also manage community engagement programs that provide free technical assistance and grant funding to municipalities to plan and implement actions that both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and advance adaptation to climate impacts. And an overarching focus of all of our work is good, effective outreach and communication about climate change across the state. What it is, what's happening, what can be done, and what we are already doing to protect residents and the environments of New York. And this is really important work because we're seeing the changing climate driving more frequent and intense impacts across New York caused by worsening climate hazards like extreme heat events, severe storms, seasonal droughts, impacts of wildfires that are happening here and elsewhere, rising sea levels. We're seeing heavy rainfall causing severe flooding in many parts of New York State. And that kind of thing is compounded with sea level rise and storm surge, making impacts worse along coastal communities, especially, and increasing risks and vulnerabilities to our ecosystems, our infrastructure, and our communities. So we know we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and slow the pace of warming that's happening with the climate. But those sorts of actions, while they're happening and they're really great that they're happening, they can take time. They can take time both regulatorily, but also the effectiveness of those actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It takes time for the climate to respond to those actions. So we know we also have to adapt and build resilience to impacts that we're seeing now and that will occur in the future. And I think an important nuance to climate adaptation that's worth mentioning compared to some other really important categories of action like an emergency response or hazard mitigation, is adaptation's focus on the anticipation of future conditions that may or may not reflect what is being experienced presently or what has been experienced historically. In climate adaptation planning, for example, that could involve using modeled data and climate projections to anticipate future scenarios and the impacts on the location that could result. The strategies and actions that are implemented should, of course, address current impacts and reduce current risk, but also serve to be effective under projected future conditions. And a really kind of simplified example of how we like to describe adaptation and its relation to resilience is, let's say, for example, the town has a road, and that road was built 30 years ago. And over the past 30 years, the number of flood events that have caused damage to that road or made that road inaccessible have increased decade after decade. So the town says, okay, we need to raise this road above, the level of flooding that we're seeing. If that road is raised above the elevation of flood that's occurring today, or that has been kind of the trend historically, that's going to be fine for tomorrow, the next day, maybe a couple of years from now. But in another, let's say 10 years, for example, you're going to find yourself in the same situation that you find yourself today. So planning to raise that road in consideration of future conditions is what builds resilience to our infrastructure and to our communities. Anticipating that future planning or conditions that we have data to support are very likely is kind of the heart of adaptation. And adaptation is just part of this umbrella of resilience that also includes preparing for threats and hazards and being able to rapidly recover from adverse conditions and disruptions. So adaptation and resilience are often talked about together, but there's nuances to each, and they're not interchangeable terms, which I think is an important thing to note. So again, why adaptation and resilience? Effective adaptation contributes to a community's resilience by building capacity to survive, adapt, and thrive under short-term and long-term climate impacts, and is most effective when it encourages community participation and engagement, which is a really core important part of adaptation. Adaptation and resilience strategies can encompass a wide variety of approaches, from policy changes, natural and nature-based features, and even sometimes engineered solutions where appropriate and necessary. Adaptation involving the conservation, sustainable management, and restoration of ecosystems and the services that those ecosystems can provide can help communities avoid risk and be resilient to impacts of climate change while providing a whole host of co-benefits like cleaner air and cleaner water. So adapting and being resilient to the impacts of climate change that we're experiencing in New York is a top priority. We see these impacts becoming more frequent, more intense, causing more damage. Hazards like flooding and heat, drought, and other climate hazards are threatening the health and safety of communities and ecosystems. And New York is doing a lot of work and continues to build on the work that is being done to address climate impacts, both within what is within the capacity of state agencies like the DEC to do. Lots of agencies are doing a lot of work in this area, but also through what we're able to help communities do. This is complicated work, it's resource intensive, and the state has a lot of programs and assistance that is available for communities. So I'm going to talk first about kind of the state level climate efforts and initiatives that DEC is involved in, and then kind of the second half, I'll talk about our programs and other types of resources that the state administers to help communities also adapt and be resilient to the climate impacts that are affecting them. And then kind of just for some, oh, I did it again. There we go. Just for like a little bit of level setting, because the kind of focus of what I'm talking about today is coastal resilience, just to kind of give an idea of like the area of the state that we're talking about, New York State's tidal coastline. This is the whole coastline of Long Island, New York City, and the Hudson River up to the Federal Dam in Troy is New York State's tidal coastline. The Great Lakes are also considered coastal, but not tidal because they're not affected by sea level rise. But it is quite an extensive part of the state. Over 15.5 million people live within the within coastal counties of New York State, which is more than any other state in the country besides California. And these communities are very vulnerable to flooding from sea level rise, storm surge, and extreme rainfall events, and can have all of those three hazards compound onto each other to create even greater risk and vulnerability. So this work is incredibly important. There we go. And whether it's a policy or a regulation, a plan or a program, or really anything in between, it's important that decisions that are made for any and all of those things are based in current and accurate climate data. That's kind of first and foremost. And the most current and accurate climate data that New York State has is provided by the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment. The Climate Impacts Assessment was released in 2024. The development of the assessment was led by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, with many other state agency academic and research contributors, DEC being one of those. And the assessment provides an in-depth analysis of historical climate impacts, as well as data modeled climate projections to inform how hazards like changes in temperature, precipitation, extreme heat, and an array of others will change across New York's geographic regions, and how those changes may impact economic sectors that are important to the state, like agriculture and energy and transportation, the economy, water resources, and many more. The Impacts Assessment website, I always like to promote whenever I have the chance, because I think it is an incredibly good resource for communities and for local governments to reference and use for climate change planning, to use as a basis for educational outreach. And it has a really good suite of resources that are available to kind of break down what the assessment is telling us about climate change impacts in the state. It has a pretty extensive catalog of adaptation strategies. It's got highlights of case studies for work that's being done around the state. And most recently, it added regional and sector fact sheets for localized descriptions of climate impacts. So highly recommend everyone check out the Climate Impacts Assessment website. We point a lot of people to it every day. Also, the Community Risk and Resiliency Act, which some folks may be familiar with, in 2014, the Community Risk and Resiliency Act, or CARA as we call it for short, was enacted in response to a trend of increasing losses due to floods, and in particular, death and damage that was caused by Tropical Storm Lee and Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. CARA is a law that directs the state's permitting entities like DEC to ensure that future climate risk is considered in projects that the state is issuing permits and funding for. And then in 2019, the state enacted the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as the Climate Act, which made some significant amendments to the original language of CARA. Kind of in a nutshell, CARA requires, among other things, that applicants for any permits that are regulated by the Uniform Procedures Act to demonstrate that they've considered future physical risk to essentially all climate hazards in their project design, including coastal impacts like flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise. Future flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise are specifically required hazards of consideration in several state funding programs and in hazardous waste facility siting programs under CARA. The Climate Act amendments to CARA also authorize DEC to require mitigation of climate risks to communities, including natural resources and even private property that's not owned by the applicant, to ensure that risk from climate change is not only mitigated at a project's location, but also that the project does not create risk for neighboring areas. And some of these projects can be pretty extensive. So that was a very important change that the Climate Act made to CARA. Additionally, CARA required DEC to work with the Department of State to develop guidance documents for the state to provide to staff and to permit applicants on how to consider future risks from climate change hazards in their project siting and design. I'll talk about a few of those guidance documents in a second, but CARA also called for DOS and DEC to create model local laws to help local governments to be more resilient to sea level rise, storm surge, and flooding. And these model local laws are available for cities, towns, and villages to adapt and adopt to meet the resilience needs of their community with assistance from their municipal attorneys. And CARA also required DEC to adopt science-based sea level rise projections by regulation. So any permitting, funding, or regulatory decisions by the state that sea level rise is applicable to should refer to these state adopted sea level rise projections. And that's beneficial because it helps to ensure that the state is consistent in the data that it's using to make decisions, regulatory, programmatic, what have you, for which sea level rise is part of the conversation. So to kind of give a quick overview of some of these guidance documents that DOS and DEC have prepared for CARA, the one that we use probably most often, the one that we refer people to most often, is the flood risk management guidance. This document provides guideline elevations for the location of structures and infrastructures both in tidal and non-tidal areas that incorporate potential future conditions, including greater risk of coastal flooding from higher sea levels, enhanced storm surge, and the risk of inland flooding expected to result from increasingly frequent extreme precipitation events. Another guidance document that I think is particularly relevant to this, this discussion is called Using Natural Measures to Reduce Risk the risk of flooding and erosion. And this document serves as a guide for the selection and planning of natural resilience measures, which are those that conserve and restore or mimic natural landforms and processes to reduce climate risk. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on some of these. And all of the guidance documents are available on the DEC's website as well. So the flood risk management guidance, like I said, is the one that we use probably most often. There isn't a part of New York State that isn't at risk for some kind of flooding, whether it's tidal or non. And this document provides technical guidance to agencies and programs that are responsible for the permitting and funding programs that are under CARA. And it recommends guideline elevations for a variety of building and infrastructure types, and incorporates guidance on how projects can consider possible future conditions from sea level rise, storm surge, flooding, and how to consider conditions when all of those things are happening at the same time on top of each other. And this next slide here is a technical slide. I'm not going to really go into the technicality of it, but I wanted to include it because it kind of helps to give some clarity to the way that the state flood risk management guidance can be used to help New York municipalities incorporate these guideline elevation recommendations into their local floodplain ordinances. Like I said, it details approaches for tidal and non-tidal areas to add guideline elevation, which means like a protective buffer above base flood elevation. And that buffer could be a future sea level rise projection, or a calculation for greater stream flow, or a future delineated floodplain. And municipalities, because New York is a home rule state, can adopt requirements in their local ordinances that are more protective than the requirements in New York State Building Code. And I'll caveat that with saying that I'm not a code expert, but municipalities should work with their building department, their code officials, and their local attorneys if this is something that they're interested in using to update their floodplain ordinances. And again, just mention that the Department of State Model Local Laws does provide options for municipalities to adopt more protective floodplain ordinances without needing to get something like code council approval. And the DEC's floodplain management unit is also really great as a resource with any questions about improving, codes having to do with the floodplain. And they do training for code officials, and their contact information is something that I can share too. And then the other document that I mentioned, the document about natural resilience measures. This document was designed primarily as a reference that DEC staff can use to encourage project applicants, especially project applicants for flood or erosion control projects, to consider the use of green infrastructure rather than gray. But I think that the content can be really helpful for any entity that wants to learn about the benefits and approaches to different kinds of natural and nature-based solutions to climate impacts. So this is a really great document that I think has a much wider applicability to help more than just state agency permitting staff. And then I mentioned that CARA required the state to adopt science-based sea level rise projections. So I wanted to just give a little bit more context for that. These projections were adopted by regulation. The regulation is called Part 490, and it establishes projections for sea level rise in 3 specified geographic locations of the state over various time intervals. The regulation itself doesn't impose any requirements on any entity, but to ensure consistency across DEC programs, any funding program, permitting program that has sea level rise as part of what needs to be considered for climate change should reference the officially state adopted science-based sea level rise projections. And the website, the webpage on the DEC website has a lot more information about the methodology. And if you really want to go into the details of the data modeling that went into these projections. These projections were updated most recently in 2024 and were first adopted in 2017. And then also wanted to mention that even though we're talking about coastal climate impacts, extreme heat is a very, very prevalent impact in New York State, even in coastal communities. Heat is still the #1 weather-related cause of death in the United States, and is a threat to all communities. In 2022, the governor's State of the State address called for DEC and the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority to develop an extreme heat action plan. This plan was led by DEC and NYSARP, but it included input and contributions from almost 24 state agencies and local partners, academic contributors, experts in various subject matters. And it includes 49 strategies across 4 action tracks, including how to prioritize ecosystem-based adaptation and green infrastructure for the mitigation of extreme heat, which can also have co-benefits for some of the coastal climate issues that we're seeing in the same places. And then one more state level planning initiative that I'll talk about, which we're in the middle of working on still. This was a 2024 State of the State directive, which called for the development of a New York State Adaptation and Resilience Plan. The development of this plan is currently underway, being led by DEC, DOS, NYSERDA, and the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. And we're kind of winding down on the first phase of this planning effort, which has produced a unifying vision and guiding principles for climate adaptation and resilience in New York. And these were developed through an extensive amount of engagement and input from state agencies and local organizations and entities, and assessed, and through those efforts, we assessed current state adaptation and resilience initiatives and identified gaps in state efforts to support local work. And so looking forward, in the next phase of this NYSARP development process, we're looking towards developing implementable actions that will advance local adaptation and resilience and meet the needs that we identified in this first phase of the state planning process. Yeah, sure. And this information is on the DEC's website, but this is the vision principles that came out of this extensive engagement process with state agencies and local partners. And we're looking for, and we'll continue to be looking for input from state agencies and just all New Yorkers kind of far and wide on what the state should be prioritizing to achieve this vision, and how these principles are already being represented in existing state work, and where there are gaps that we need to fill, where maybe some of these sort of high-level principles are not as prevalent as they should be in state adaptation and resilience work, and how the state can help communities with their adaptation and resilience work. So I'll throw this up on the screen really quickly too. This is a link to the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan website. You can also sign up for the email newsletter if you want to get updates on the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan process. There's an email address that you can reach out to us at any time. And then we have a live input form that asks about state priorities and what sort of actions the state should be looking at to achieve that state adaptation and resilience plan vision. So any submissions of that input form are always much appreciated. Okay. So next, I want to share about some local climate resilience programs and resources that the state is administering that are specifically available for communities and local governments to help them in this work. Starting strong with a program that I think many people are familiar with, called Climate Smart Communities, or CSC. The Climate Smart Communities program is an interagency program that is administered by DEC. The Climate Smart Communities program includes a framework that helps local governments plan and implement actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build resilience to climate impacts. As of last week, there are over 470 local governments that have registered as a climate smart community. And that means that they've adopted a resolution pledging that they're going to take action across multiple categories, or pledge elements as they're called, to do things like reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage, implement climate smart materials management and land use practices, enhance community resilience, and several others. And the kind of second step of the Climate Smart Communities program is a certification program. So after a community has registered and passed that resolution pledge, they then will complete actions that fall under those pledge element categories. Those actions include things like a climate vulnerability assessment, or electrifying their municipal fleet, installing living shorelines, and each action is associated with a number of points, and then the municipalities can submit the completed documentation for completed actions to receive a certification. Right now, there's 2 levels of certification: bronze and silver. It's been a couple years in the works, a gold level certification program, but there is a vision for that. And Climate Smart Communities really is kind of the state's flagship program for demonstrating local leadership and commitment to climate action. This program has exploded in the years that I've been with OCC. Our community engagement section works nonstop at continually improving this program. And there are over 168 certified communities across the state, 144 bronze, 24 silver. I think we're announcing more this week. And in Westchester County alone, there are 42 climate smart communities that are registered, and that includes 19 bronze certified and 8 silver certified. So kudos to Westchester County. A little bit more on the Climate Smart Communities program. The CSC certification portal is the website where all the information about Climate Smart Communities program can be found. There's model language for the resolution, and there's all of the actions that can be completed for this program and how to submit them, and just everything basically you need to know about Climate Smart Communities is available at this portal site, climatesmart.ny.gov. And the Climate Smart Communities program overall encompasses more than just the certification program. There's also a technical assistance program and a grant funding program, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. The certification program, like I said, creates a framework for actions for both greenhouse gas mitigation and climate adaptation. Those actions range from helping to develop plans, to taking those plans to develop projects, to implementing those projects, and kind of at its core, also recognizing leadership at the state level, recognizing the communities that are doing this work and the local governments that are doing this work with their partners, with their residents, because it is hard work and it does deserve recognition when municipalities are moving forward with this. And so to kind of give an example of the actions that are part of the certification program, there are a couple of categories or pledge elements. This one that I pulled out as an example is a category for enhancing community resilience to climate change. And it includes kind of a wide range of actions, such as like identifying and assessing climate impacts and vulnerabilities, developing plans and incorporating resilience into existing plans, and just some of the examples of actions, which there are many in this category that are most relevant to coastal climate resilience, can include doing a project to conserve natural areas, watershed-based flood mitigation planning, design flood elevation and flood maps, which that flood risk management guidance can be really helpful for. Also projects for riparian buffers and nature-based shorelines. So there's a lot there, and there is a lot of information about each of these actions, this is what each of the actions look like. So every action in all of the categories includes a page like this. It's a very comprehensive overview of the action, the benefits, and kind of an estimated time frame and budget and resource needs for a municipality to complete this kind of action. And communities can use the Climate Smart framework to guide their climate action for any purpose, but if they're going to do these actions, they can choose to submit them for points and receive certification recognition. So each of these action descriptions also includes what is needed to obtain points for the action if the community is choosing to work towards earning that bronze or silver certification. And for all of the actions, there's also a pretty extensive supplementary resource list that can be really helpful in helping communities with completing and implementing all of this work. And because this is really hard work and it's not easy, especially for a lot of municipalities and communities that are stretched thin and may not have all of the resources or expertise at their disposal to do as much of climate resilience work as they want to. The Climate Smart Communities program has a free technical assistance program provided through our Climate Smart Communities regional coordinators. And these are practitioners that live and work in New York State that were selected through a competitive procurement process based on their expertise by New York State to be our designated Climate Smart Communities coordinators. And there are coordinators available for all regions of the state. All of the assistance that they offer is completely free. These are folks that we've worked with for years, and they do really great work, and they have really great connections with the communities that they work with. And they can help with a whole range of things, whether a community is working towards climate smart community certification or not. They can help with conducting outreach. They can help with plan development. They can help with public education, capacity building, submitting for certification. They can help with getting grant application materials together to an extent. So if you're working with a community or a local government that has not been in touch with your Climate Smart Community Regional Coordinator, the certification portal has the contact information for all of those folks, and I highly recommend reaching out to them and making a connection. They're always ready and willing to help in any way that they can. And then last thing about the Climate Smart Communities program is the grant program. This is a program that is offered annually. Our next round, our 2026 round, is going to be announced soon in May. It's almost May already. And so this program offers grant funding to complete specific climate smart community certification actions, but it also has a non-specific implementation general category. And the request for applications of the RFA that's released when the grant program is opened has all the information you need to know about what types of projects are eligible for grant funding, but just some kind of relevant examples that could receive grant funding through this program include projects that aim to increase natural resilience to flood risks, like living shorelines or nature-based landscape features. There's funding available to relocate or retrofit critical infrastructure to reduce flood risk. There's funding for replacing or right-sizing culverts. And it's not all flood specific. There's also funding for projects that can help to mitigate the effects of other climate impacts like extreme heat, for example, through like the creation of cooling centers. And a relatively new funding category that I think last year was the first year that was offered was funding for engineering feasibility studies and engineering design to support flood risk and flood alleviation projects. And this funding can include elements of engineering design that are for flood control, dam repair, replacement, removal, levee certification or recertification studies, bridge and culvert replacement, stormwater system upgrades, nature-based construction, bioretention projects. There's a really long list of the types of projects that Climate Smart Communities grant funding is available for. There is a match requirement. There's a 50-50 match requirement, but that requirement for match is less in disadvantaged communities or communities with a certain median household income, and the RFA has all that information in there too. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be announced soon, usually opens in May, and the application period runs through the end of July. And then DEC has a really great resource to kind of give you a sense of the types of projects that have been completed with Climate Smart Communities grant funding. This is the DECinfo Locator. It includes a lot of data layers for a lot of different division programs. But for example, it also has a layer that shows Climate Smart Communities funded grant programs. So I just kind of pulled out a screenshot of Westchester County, and you can see these are just a sampling of some of the Climate Smart Communities projects that have been done in Westchester County. And I pulled out just a few that had a relevance to flood resilience. And I think it's helpful to see too that when we talk about projects, we're not even just talking about physical things that are shovel in the ground. Planning is a really important component to building resilience. It helps you to prioritize and make sure that the actions that you do implement are intentional and will actually improve the resilience of the community where it needs to be focused. So the info locator is a really good tool to get more information about what actually is happening in the community. And not all local work is that's happening is state guided or state funded. This was a project that was actually shared with me by the Climate Smart Community Coordinator for Westchester County. And it's always great to see and shout out municipalities that are doing this work. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this project. I really wasn't until it was shared with me, but this is a living shoreline project that was done at the, I guess it's the Edith Reed Wildlife Sanctuary in Rye. The description of this project is, I guess this area had some pretty devastating damage from Hurricane Sandy and then future storms, and there was a need for restoration in this area. So Westchester County, who led and funded this project, did shoreline restoration and erosion control using nature and natural based components, native vegetation, shoreline stabilization, and I think is a really good example of projects that have a climate resilience focused objective that are utilizing nature and natural based features. And afterwards, if anyone has any more information about this project, I would love to hear it, because I think it is a really great example of local work. And then one of the other programs that I wanted to share that I think is also potentially very relevant for this area too is our Resilient New York program. This is administered by the DEC Division of Water and the New York State Office of General Services. And this is a program that produces flood studies for communities in high-risk watersheds. They work with a consulting engineer, and these studies model current and future flows and make specific recommendations to reduce flooding and ways to make adjacent communities more resilient to climate change, while improving stream and floodplain ecology. And wherever possible, the recommendations that come out of these reports prioritize ecosystem-based and nature-based solutions. There are quite a few flood studies that have been done throughout the state, as well as Westchester County, 68 total with 15 underway since the program started in 2018. And all of these flood studies and the recommendations are PE stamped and certified. And the program is working on adding to their list of high-risk watersheds that they will do studies on. So you can kind of see that most of these studies are in upstate New York. Being from Long Island, I still think of Westchester County as upstate New York, although I'm sure lots of people would disagree with me. But with the exception of Long Island, the Resilient New York program is really looking to cover all high-risk watersheds with these flood studies and be able to provide recommendations.
Question on that slide.
Yeah. Sorry, say that one more time.
The area that's in red, that's in Westchester area, what does that area represent?
Those are the watersheds that have flood studies done already. Yeah. And the website down here for the Resilient New York program is got all of the flood studies that you can take a look at and see them online as well. And just some of the recommendation types that come out of those studies, kind of listed here. This is not a complete list, but most of these studies, where they can, will prioritize ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions, but the recommendations that come out of the flood studies kind of cover a very comprehensive range of project categories that the watershed would benefit from. And there's lots of watersheds throughout New York State. Not all of them have yet to receive a flood study. So the Resilient New York program created a scope of work for comparable studies. If you're in a watershed that has not received a flood study yet through the Resilient Watershed program, this generic scope of work can be used by localities who might want to pursue a flood study from a consultant on their own. And so this scope of work can be used to create a procurement document and includes kind of the main points to ask for when procuring a consultant on your own to get a flood study that's comprehensive and that's going to incorporate climate projections into the modeling that's needed. And this is particularly relevant because this year is the second year. Oops, how do I go back? Thank you. This is the second year that the Resilient Watershed program has had grant funding available to complete the recommended projects that are in the flood studies. So the Resilient Watershed Grant program, which is now open and will be open until June 26th, has funding available, quite a lot of funding available for watersheds and communities within the watersheds that have received these flood studies already to actually do the projects that are recommended in them. And if you have a comparable flood study that you've done, you can also receive funding through this program. Just noting that if you do have a comparable study that wasn't done specifically through the Resilient New York program, the deadline for applications is a little bit earlier because there's some additional review that goes into that. But this is a grant program that received quite a positive response last year. They funded millions and millions of dollars worth of projects and are continuing to grow this program. And the link on the bottom of the slide is where you can get all the information about this open grant application opportunity. And the request for applications has all the details on what to submit and what is eligible for funding. And this is also something that I like to mention when we talk about available funding for resilience and coastal resilience projects too. The Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act, or Bond Act for short, because that's a mouthful. This came to be in 2022 when New Yorkers voted to approve a ballot proposition to make $4.2 billion available for environmental and community projects. State agencies, local governments, some private entities can access the funding that was established through the Bond Act for projects that cover a range of categories, including protecting water quality, climate change adaptation and resilience, green job creation, and greenhouse gas mitigation as well. The Bond Act, that $4.2 billion, is not a specific funding program, but the money in the Bond Act has been injected into many programs, many funding programs across many state agencies, and just made a lot more money available for a lot of these funding programs that the state agencies have been administering for years, as well as the development of new funding programs where that sort of need has been identified. For example, the Resilient Watersheds Grant has had Bond Act funding made available to it, so more money is available through this program. The Climate Smart Communities program received Bond Act funding. There's also a Community Resilience and Flood Risk Reduction Grant program that I think is administered by Department of State. That is open now, as well as a non-point source pollution abatement control program. And like I said, all the programs that the Bond Act has inserted money into are administered by a lot of different state agencies, not necessarily just DEC. And then there are kind of ongoing open enrollment programs that have funding available, like the Farmland Protection Implementation Grant Program, Electric School Bus Infrastructure Grant Program, and these I believe, accept applications until the funding runs out. To just give you an idea of where that $4.2 billion is going. It's going into programs that put that money back into communities. And the Bond Act website is a really great resource to get more information about all of these programs. They created this tool called the Funding Finder, which has a large number of the funding programs. And when they're open, you can filter by the project type, by the applicant type. Highly recommend taking a look at this, at the Bond Act website for this funding finder and just seeing what kind of programs are out there to fund projects. And it also has a lot of good resources on it too, for resilience support. Some of the programs that I've talked about today are on the Bond Act website, and it's just a really great kind of source for lots of information about resilience and the funding that's available from the state for resilience. So this is the Bond Act website, Environmental Bond Act at .ny.gov, and the Bond Act team is always really great and willing to help. You can email bondact@dec.ny.gov with any questions. And then I wanted to kind of finish up with just promoting some of the work that my team is doing at DEC Office of Climate Change Adaptation section. We do a lot of work on the regulatory side through the Community Risk and Resiliency Act, but equally we do as much work with the development of tools and resources to support local adaptation and resilience planning and implementation. And we do a lot of our work with partners. And those partners include SUNY partners and other sorts of academic institutions. It really expands the bandwidth of what we can do through these partnerships. And some of the things that we kind of have in development now include an urban heat island mapper. This is something we're working on with SUNY ESF. And this is in the top right corner is a screenshot of that mapper. This is a mapper that is showing or going to show the location of urban heat islands. Urban heat islands are a phenomenon where an area, particularly an urban area where there's a lot of dark paved surfaces, gets hotter than surrounding areas, creating the term an urban heat island. And so this mapper, in its first phase, which has just been completed, mapped out all the locations of urban heat islands. And the next iteration of this tool will be to use data projections to show how those urban heat islands are going to expand, change, where new urban heat islands are potentially going to occur as the climate warms and extreme heat becomes more prevalent with climate change. We're also working with the University of Buffalo on a planning toolkit for exploratory scenario planning, which can be very helpful with adaptation and resilience planning. Exploratory scenario planning is an exercise where a community can take climate hazards and even non-hazard conditions and explore the interaction of those two conditions to kind of imagine future scenarios that could potentially unfold, and then develop a plan and strategies for how to adapt to those future conditions. So we're creating this toolkit. It's going to have a game as kind of like a teaching tool for exploratory scenario planning. It's going to include kind of an augmented reality modeling component. And we're going to be training the Climate Smart Communities coordinators and other adaptation practitioners around the state in how to do that, so that they can take that to the communities they work with and incorporate that into their planning exercises. And we're also working with Cornell on a drought prediction tool, which will forecast near-term drought conditions. That is in the works. And we also just recently collaborated with the DEC Floodplain Management Unit and Department of State to create visual infographics for code official training that illustrates the recent Uniform Building Code updates that included adding sea level rise and extending the state flood hazard area to the federal 500-year floodplain. And all of this is available on the DEC website or soon to be available on the DEC website. And then one of the most important things that we do is in our work to support local climate adaptation and resilience planning. This is from the DEC website as well. We developed a climate adaptation and resilience plan template that's currently in draft form. We're working on some revisions to it, but it can be used by communities to help guide their adaptation process, help lay out the important components of an adaptation plan, like a vulnerability assessment and developing actions, having an implementation plan for those actions, and how to monitor the effectiveness of those actions as conditions change. And I'll also plug that we are partnering with New York Sea Grant on the development of a training curriculum for municipalities who are getting ready to do adaptation planning or who are in kind of the early phases of adaptation planning. And this training curriculum is open to local government staff and the members of the public that maybe are part of committees that are working with them on their adaptation planning, and focuses on how to incorporate public input and engagement and the best practices around that in their adaptation planning processes. And if you're interested in, we're recruiting for that training program now. It's a one-day training, and municipalities are encouraged to take the training together. If they're kind of neighboring, or maybe they're working together in the cohort for planning. The QR code here can bring you to the input form or the interest form, or you can email kickstart@ccarp@cornell.edu, or reach out to your Climate Smart Community Coordinator. They're helping us recruit for that training. And we're trying to schedule that out for the next, for the rest of the year right now. And that is it. I know that was a lot of information, and I appreciate the opportunity to present on all of this information and the work that we're doing. If you have any questions, or you want to learn more about anything in particular, I included my email address and also the Climate Change Office's email address. And the DEC website is also a great place to find all of the programs and things that I talked about tonight too.
You're right. There's a lot of.
There's a lot. I could honestly talk for another hour about other things too.
Simon, did you have some questions?
I introduced myself to you earlier. Simon Skolnick. I live in the town of Essex, which is 50 miles from here. But as I mentioned to you, I'm also the president of the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions, which represents the entire state. So my interests obviously are beyond Westchester alone, but it involves Westchester quite frankly. So I have two questions. Two parts. The first one is really more of basic information. Is there any place that you know of that one could go to find out the actual shoreline mileage? For example, Hudson River, how many miles of river shoreline does the Hudson River have? How many miles does Long Island have? How many miles does the south coast of the South Shore of Westchester have? I mean, it's for me, that's a means of comparison as to what's going on in different parts of the state. So is there any place that one could go to get that information?
Repeat the question.
So you're wanting to know if there's any place to find the mileage of New York's coastal boundaries, basically. And that's a really good question. I think there's probably a couple different places that information can be found. And I'm not 100% sure specifically, but I would imagine that maybe USGS or Army Corps might have that information, through some surveys that they've done. The Department of State GIS Gateway might have that information as well.
New York State has that, something coming out of New York State with that.
Well, the Department of State is a New York State agency.
New York State.
Yeah. DOS.
Lauren has
Yes.
a good idea. The county GIS folks might have.
Mhm.
as well.
And the second part was that when you put up the chart showing sea level rise in different parts of the local area, where does Westchester's South Shore fit in? Is that part of the Long Island area? Is that, I'm assuming it must be part of the Long Island area because it's just facing Long Island. So it must represent pretty much